Good day and welcome to another JVR Lunch and Learn webinar. I'm Kobe Hayes, a research psychologist here at JVR Psychometrics. And in today's webinar or presentation, I want to talk about the value of the career value scale. So jumping into it, in the abstract for this webinar, I promised that we would look at the CVS and its application areas, but that we will also address some of the latest South African research that was done here at JVR on the actual assessment. In addition to that, however, I also want to just look at conceptualizing values, going into a bit of a historical view, but more specifically within the behavioral sciences, and then looking a bit at what value measuring or assessing for values can actually add. And then we're going to also just look at the development of the CVS. And I'm going to also take you through one of our other products, an integrated report that actually consists of the CVS in use with another scale, but we'll get to that, which is called the JVR Sales Potential Report. So jam-packed, lots of information sharing, but I hope that it will be insightful and that you will get to learn something about the assessment in today's presentation. I want to just start us off with a quote that for me really embodies the value that assessing for values can add to a company or any type of organization. Now, Stan Slap, who is an international expert in organizational culture, stated that the myth of management is that your personal values are irrelevant or inappropriate at work. He argues that values can play an intrinsic role in employee culture. And throughout this webinar, I will aim to further highlight this. It really just sums up for me that oftentimes we tend to overlook values or individual values and what impact that can potentially have on organizational culture, but also on the manner in which that employee or person engages within the actual organization. So really going to talk to that in this webinar as well. So let's then look at the conceptualization of values. And like I said, I would like to start with a bit of a historical perspective. And for me, this is really to understand the importance of values and to show that it's not something new. It has actually been researched or written about for a very, very long time. And I'm just going to highlight some key figures in behavioral sciences across sociology, psychology, that has researched values or that has published on values, just to give a bit of an indication of their views and how that has evolved through the years. In this historical perspective, I'm going to refer to an article that was written by Clausen and Vinson that actually identified these key people. So they went and did a multidisciplinary analysis of people who have talked about values or written about values, and they went into all different fields. But for today's webinar, I just want to focus on behavioral sciences for the most part. So let's then start off with the 1920s. And in 1927, Thomas and Zanicki actually published on values, and they viewed values as objective social elements that will impose themselves on the actual individual and through that process actually provoke how the individual will react in different circumstances. So really something that influences the behavior of the actual individual. Becker then went in the 40s and he considered values as vital in choosing between right or wrong and also determining human actions. So we're already starting to see a trend here. Values impose themselves on the individual and sort of guides behavior, and then also helps us to choose between what is right and what is wrong, and might act differently in different contexts or circumstances as well. In the 50s then, Rosenberg linked values to an individual's cognitive structure, and also said that it can influence a person's attitudes. So the way we think about stuff and the way that we express ourselves, influenced by our values firstly, and really cannot be disconnected from our value system. And then that also can influence our attitude, so how we see certain things or how we would actually view something and want to behave. How will we react to it, basically, at the end of the day? So moving into the 60s, we saw both Blow and Rockich writing about values. For Blow, and I hope I'm pronouncing his surname correctly, values were a prime determinant of social conduct. He saw them as elements that defined a group's identity and sort of common standards of behavior. So more looking at the collective, what is socially acceptable, what is the correct thing based on a group of people to then actually do all the correct behavior. And if we link that to organizations, we can think about organizational rules, for instance, and how you should act, what is deemed as appropriate and inappropriate. And that is really guided then also by your values, but also then could possibly create some conflict between your value and the actual system that you are in. Now, Rockich is probably one of the most influential contributors to values theory. And he stated that values and attitudes are linked on a cognitive level, and that they influence our individual system, or the system in which the individual also operates or work, live in. So for him, values were more important in determining behavior than other elements, for instance. And he also argued that different situations could then bring these values into conflict with one another. So not just that your values then conflict with the system that you are in, but different scenarios, different circumstances that you are in could cause some of your values to take an opposing stance and could make you value something more in a specific context than in a different context. So really that shift of the values, which ones are coming to the front, basically, which ones are applicable for the specific circumstance. Then building on his actual work, on Rockich's work, Swatch and Bilski went on to devise a basic theory of human values that then views values as cognitive representations of three universal requirements. The first one being your biological needs, your interactional requirements for interpersonal coordination, but also the societal demands for group welfare and survival. So really what is appropriate or what is good for the individual, but also what is deemed appropriate or good for the group, for the collective. And we also then saw, jumping a bit ahead to more recent research in 2014, that Gouveia, Mulfont, and Guerra elaborated on Swartz's theory and again linked values to cognitive expressions, but saw them as cognitive expressions of the individual's needs, and also then brought in elements of survival and thriving, and how different values will be utilized or will play into whether you are in a system where you are just surviving or whether you are in a system where you are actually thriving. So a lot of elaboration, a lot of research, a lot of writing about values, and it's really not a new concept, something that has been around for a long time and that in the past couple of years has been receiving more and more attention from researchers, and specifically also then in the corporate or organizational context. And that is then what I want to look at next. What do they mean for us within an organizational context, or for the work that we go and do within companies, within organizations? So there I want to look firstly at the value that values can actually add. Now, values has been linked in organizational research to many positive business outcomes, And literature do show that an alignment between the individual's values and those of the company organization where they are employed will actually relate to elements like higher job satisfaction, improved or enhanced performance, which then leads to greater productivity as well, but also a higher commitment from the employees. And then on the opposite side of that, where there is a misalignment between your values and the value ecosystem that you are in, oftentimes we do see that there are higher employee turnovers. People tend to leave the system if it conflicts with their values, but then also greater rates of burnout because you aren't experiencing that job satisfaction and actually experience elements of dissatisfaction, which leads to quicker burnout at the end of the day. And the research has also shown that personal values can actually influence the career choices that our clients make, and can also influence then how their career development trajectory will play out. So really important value that we see here for assessing values in terms of helping people with career choices, with planning a career plan or a career trajectory at the end of the day. And being able to show them that knowing your own value system and knowing the value system of an organization can help you to decide whether or not you will be a good fit, but at the same time also can help the company recognize whether a potential candidate will be a good fit to their organization or won't. That then brings me to the CVS, and I think that what we have seen so far really highlights the importance of being able to identify what a client values, specifically in terms of their working environment. And the CVS Career Value Scale really speaks to this quite well. Just starting off with what the CVS is. So the Career Value Scale is a measure of work values, preferences, and needs. We have already established that values form a part of an individual's core beliefs and that they can actually then influence the career choices, but also give meaning to a person's career. And the career values was designed specifically to look at that and to be able to identify that and then link that to satisfaction or dissatisfaction as well. It was developed by Psychometrics Canada, and in Africa it is distributed by JVR Psychometrics. It consists of it consists of 10 values or scales that are clustered into 3 broad domains or factors, as 88 items in total, that ranges between 7 to 12 items per scale. And then people respond to these items that are all value-related statements on a Likert type rating scale that ranges from not at all important to very important for that individual. In terms of the development of the CVS, I want to just briefly cover that. It is available in the Career Value Scale manual in a lot more detail, but I thought it would be important to just look at it and how they came up with the instrument and the research that has gone into this instrument. They were developed, the scales of the CVS, based on a thorough literature review, but also earlier work that has been done on values, and specifically research that was done by Donald Super and the International Work Importance Study. So there's a lot more information about that in the manual as well. But these 10 scales that were then identified are considered as relevant to a client's career development process. So very specific to careers or to work. And after the 10 scales or the values were then identified, a thorough review of values literature was done to actually then come up with the operational definitions for each of the scales firstly, but then also for the items that were written for these scales. And with writing these items, they followed very specific rules. So that the content of the items had to relate directly to careers, that the items should, each one of them, only measure a single construct or value, They should be short, direct, and easy to understand. And then that a 5-point Likert scale was developed to allow individuals to give an indication of how important each one of those statements were for them. So initially, the CVS consisted of 120 items, or 120 items were then written with 12 items per scale. But after collecting data and examining the internal consistency and item reliabilities, 32 of these items were then dropped from the questionnaire, bringing it to the 88 items that we know today. Then after the refinement of the items and all of the analyses, it was then standardized on a large sample of over 28,000 people. From this group, a match sample then of 7,000 males and 7,000 females were selected to create the North American norms. And Psychometrics Canada then continues to do research on the CVS, and they publish case studies on the use of the assessment within various settings and in combination with other tools on their website that is available for you to view and to read. And as with any psychometric assessment, it is essential that research is ongoing to ensure that norms, etc., are then still applicable. And that brings us to the South African research and norms. And we're going to be talking about that in a lot more detail later on in the webinar. But JVR Psychometrics has then, in the last year, done research on the career value scale within the South African context to generate norms specifically for the South African population, and we are in the process of publishing those norms on the JVR online portal as well. When using the CVS, it is then important to consider a few things like what the participant's age should be, their reading ability, but also what administration platform we can use to give the assessment to people, and then also whether or not any accreditation training is required. Now, the Career Value Scale manual suggests that it can be used with individuals 15 years and older. I put there in bracket that I recommend that some work experience is necessary, but what we have found in the South African sample is that based on the research, some of the items doesn't necessarily relate so well to people who do not have work experience yet, because they are all related to careers. So very important there that there has to be some level of work experience, and maybe that we should consider using it with only individuals who are completed their education and are in an area where they can actually work. For the reading ability, it is compatible to a grade 8 reading ability or an NQF level of 1. And then the career value scale is available through the JVR online portal for administration, and there isn't any accreditation training required for the CVS. But as we all know, best practice, we need to know the assessment well and make sure that we can actually administer it and give feedback before we use it. So just making sure that we are competent in the use of the assessment, although there isn't any formal accreditation training. The scales of the CVS then, like I said, I also call them the 10 values, are divided into 3 broader factors, which is working with others, self-expression, and then extrinsic rewards. Working with others is concerned with the interpersonal aspect of the working environment, where self-expression is the way in which you would approach work, and then extrinsic rewards is that what motivates the individual in their working environment. Working with others then consists of service orientation, team orientation, and influence. And people with higher scores on service orientation will value helping people with their problems. They're likely to place a high value on work settings where you can sort of gauge the thoughts and feelings of other people or your colleagues. And common examples would include for them caregiving or your more customer service type of positions. They value activities where there is a direct positive effect on others. People then with a high score on teamwork would value working closely with co-workers and clients. They value encouragement, but also encouraging others. And occupations that rely heavily on teamwork or networking or relationships and relationship building will probably be most rewarding for people scoring high on that scale. People then with high scores on the influence scale would value being directive rather than collaborative, and they like to control and manage the work that are involved in and will potentially enjoy having a high level of responsibility and be more satisfied in an organization where they can use a directive leadership style. Excuse me. Then self-expression consists of creativity, independence, excitement, and career development. People with your higher scores on creativity will value working in an organization that promotes ingenuity and creativity. They will value developing new ideas or exploring unconventional approaches and using their imagination. Types of work that will be satisfying to them is something that will require some level of creativity and innovation, or that will allow them to use their curiosity to identify and evaluate new ideas. People then with a high score on independence will value the self-reliance and the freedom to set their own goals and schedules, so managing their own task at the end of the day. They value working without supervision and enjoy tasks that can be worked on independently without having to seek advice from co-workers or colleagues. And the type of work that they enjoy will most probably allow them to do things in their own way for most of the time. So really having that autonomy in what they actually do. People then with their higher scores on excitement will value trying new things or environments where there is some uncertainty and where change can be expected. And the type of work that they will enjoy will include the possibility of trying something new or some element of being able to take risks as well. People with your high scores on career development will value developing both personally but also professionally. So learning new skills, expanding their expertise, and they would like to work in organizations where there is a culture of lifelong learning or where there are constant challenges and where they can have an opportunity to develop some new skills or enhance the ones that they already have. The extrinsic rewards domain or factor consists of financial rewards, prestige, and security. People with high scores on financial rewards will value having enough income to ensure that they can afford life's luxuries. Excellent financial rewards are key to their happiness and satisfaction. They would value working in an organization that values financial incentives or where they are paid according to their performance. That will then motivate them to perform more for greater than financial rewards. People with higher scores on prestige would value recognition and acclaim. So working in organizations where they are publicly recognized as a superior performer. Also will value working for an organization that in itself is well known or has a reputation and is recognized as being among the best. And then people with high scores on the security scale or security value will then value a consistent career path and a feeling of job security, preferring a steady and predictable rather than rapid or unpredictable change-heavy type of environments. So we'll really enjoy working where they feel that they can plan for the future. I then next want to briefly take you through what the career values scale report looks like. Firstly, the report will give us an overview of a candidate's score on each one of the actual 10 scales. And you will see that there is, a bit of a description there on the left-hand side next to the low score, but also next to the higher score. So really putting both of them in a positive manner. And then from there on, it goes on to describe each of the actual 3 domains, a bit of a definition or write up a narrative of what that domain is, and then going into detail for each one of the values or scales in that domain, where you actually have a write-up of what the score will mean for that person in the work environment. And if you look there, for instance, under team orientation, right at the bottom, there are sources of satisfaction and sources of dissatisfaction that they also highlight then for each scale. They then go on later in the report to actually just put all of this together in terms of the three domains. So when you are working with others, your main sources of satisfaction are likely to be, and that is then taken from the earlier part of the report where they give that information. And they also do the same with the sources of dissatisfaction. So really making it quite easy for you to help your client to identify what is likely to satisfy them and what is likely to dissatisfy them based on their actual report and their actual scores. The report then also goes on and gives you a developmental section where you can put together a career plan with the candidate. And here they can indicate from the values that they scored high on, those core values from the report that they actually view as essential in order for them to have a satisfying career. It is also recommended that this should be repeated from time to time, and that if there is a change in those values, that should lead to a conversation. Why did they change? Why is a different value suddenly more important to you? It might be a progression, a natural progression in life. As somebody gets closer to retirement age, they might start valuing something like security a bit more than creativity, for instance. So really a lacquer way to build a conversation with your client sitting in front of you. And then they also further look at the current career situation. And you can sort of evaluate it in terms of how many satisfiers or dissatisfiers are present in their current career or current situation. And then these are again based on their actual scale scores and would consist of different text or narrative if the candidate had a high score versus a low score on the actual scale or value. But really nice to provide some insight into what career development the candidate could consider going forward. Some of the application areas of the CVS, we'll get into a bit more detail around that, but I just want to put in another quote that was actually from Sean Baker, who is from Psychometrics Canada and actually one of the developers of the CVS. And he said that in the context of career guidance and development, clarification of values will assist in providing an employee with the self-knowledge that is often missing, and secondly, giving a number of career choices, help the client choose the one that will best lead to a satisfying career. And we saw earlier that the insight into your own values can assist you with career guidance and actually then enhance your level of job satisfaction, which you also can sort of gauge from the report and while going through that developmental section of the report with your client. So based on this, the CVS is then best suited for career guidance, coaching, and personal or career development as a tool to help candidates identify those values that are important to them to have satisfying careers. And I'm going to, in this presentation, specifically pay attention to using the CVS in career guidance. So just going to spend a few minutes on that as well. When then using the CVS in the context of career guidance, it's important to clearly explain the roles of values and how values can relate to different career contexts. Here, it would be valuable for you to give some information into how values can impact on their experiences within different careers. And for the role that they are expected to work in, what type of things might play in there. Let's take an example of a person who values teamwork or has a high score on team orientation. They would not necessarily feel satisfied in a job where they are expected to work on their own for long periods of time. and they would need a bit more of the collaboration and interaction with their other colleagues. Next, we need to help the candidate identify those values that they feel will enable them to feel satisfied in their careers. And like we saw, the report does that for us by giving that developmental section where you can go through these actual steps. And then prioritizing them according to how important they are to the candidate in terms of their job satisfaction. And you would also here want to assist him with resolving any internal conflicts between competing sets of values. So they may value teamwork or team orientation, but they can also value influence and independence, and be in a role where they can't necessarily satisfy all three of those values. So it might at times mean that because they have to influence the choices of others or be in a more directive management role, that they cannot always satisfy that value of collaboration and teamwork, because their role doesn't always lean toward that. Also have to then help the candidate to discover their sources of satisfaction and also the sources of dissatisfaction in their current careers, or in specific careers that they are considering, so that they might be interested in going into, and then help them to use all of the information that we have on the table to identify some potential careers where they believe that their core values will be met and where they feel that they will be more satisfied in. The report and the way that that development section is set up really allows you to go through these steps and to be able to really, in an interactive way with their report in front of them, go through this and guide them in their choices. But at the end of the day, it's still very important to remember that they have to themselves identify where they think these values will be met and where they will feel most satisfied. And then there are just some things that we need to remember as well when we are going to use the CVS in career guidance. It should be used in combinations with other assessments when we do career guidance. I mean, the CVS only reports on your work values, but you may also need to assess a candidate's actual skill or their personality traits in order to know whether or not they actually have the competency potential for specific careers. Just because they feel their values will be met in a career and they might be satisfied there, doesn't necessarily mean that they have the necessary personality traits to fit in a situation or a career like that. So very important to always then use it in combination with other tools. Like I said, I also included the JVR Sales Potential Report in today's webinar, just as another example of where the CVS can be applied. The Sales Potential Report is an integrated report that combines the CVS and the Customer Service Aptitude Profile in order then to give an indication of a candidate's sales potential across 7 sales processes that we will look at in a little bit more detail going forward in the presentation. And it is appropriate for use with individuals 18 years and older, and can be used for selections, placements, but also then for development. So the Sales Potential Report then gives a candidate's potential for sales across 7 sales processes that are prospecting, initiating contact, building rapport, developing and presenting an offer, managing objections, making the sale, retaining and cultivating the relationship. And we're going to look at each one of them briefly, and they are what we call the JVR sales process. So what we have identified as the different processes in a sale. And then we'll go through each of them very briefly, and I'm also going to show you the output of the sales potential report for you to just know what you can get from it. So with prospecting, it's about defining and researching your identified target market. So being able to identify possible prospects and to then devise strategies to approach these prospects or opportunities, and researching them, really finding out as much as possible and considering the benefits, but also being able to anticipate potential obstacles. And then consider opportunities into other markets and strategies to be able to expand your reach. Initiating contact is about setting up meetings with potential clients to understand their company and their industry. So listening to their challenges and their needs and consider opportunities for partnership. So really understand how you can help them and what they need. And then to identify points of contact that emphasize the benefits of the client making use of your services and your product offering. So being able to link that back to what you can offer them. Building rapport is listening to the clients and focusing on their needs and offering support or information. So being approachable and laying a good foundation for open communication and future collaboration. So really being available for them when they have queries and to support them throughout the process and not just once off giving information and then leaving them to figure it out for themselves, but really walking a bit of a path with them. Developing and presenting the offer, you use the knowledge that you gained from that and then also from your own products and your own services to develop a customized approach which provides the client with a solution or product that meets their needs. So really facilitating buy-in by creating confidence in the quality of your services or products and your ability to be able to meet their expectations. So again, really needing to listen and use all of the previous steps and your actual knowledge of what you can offer and how you can adapt that to what extent to be able to customize it and meet the need or the expectation of the client. Managing objections, being adaptable to the needs of the client and to make adjustments accordingly. So managing resistance or objections in a professional manner that balances the need of the client, but also of your business. So really being able to deal with those obstacles or challenges or things where the client might be a bit resistant to elements of the service, elements of the product, and being able to manage that and still maintain or build that relationship in order for you to be able to then make the sale. Making the sale is closing the deal and obtaining commitments from your clients. So ensuring that they are satisfied with the offerings and the adjustments that have been made, but clarifying also the expectations of all of the role players and developing guidelines on the requirements needed from all parties to streamline processes going forward. And then, of course, the last very important one, retaining and cultivating, following up with them to really make sure that they are satisfied or to manage their satisfaction promptly and appropriately and to know how that will impact future processes, but remaining aware of the changing needs of the client and looking for opportunities where you can upsell or grow the client, and also then providing a service to the client that will encourage them to refer you to others. So building more opportunities, building that reputation, and really making sure that you do get other sales out of what you've done with the client already. So in terms of the report that you get, it gives you an overview where it plots your results and you get an indication of whether this is a potential or whether it can be a potential strength. And you get a score there in the middle one for each one of these phases that then puts it in the category. And if you will see there in the actual wheel, it will sort of pull out the one that is the potential strength. So the one that we can really identify as you're already quite capable in this area. So we might need to develop some of the other areas a bit more. And then it goes on to give you a section for each one of the actual phases. Firstly, a definition, and then some of the strengths and some of the developmental areas. So really giving you there an indication of the very nice potential that you have with the actual right mark that you see there, the correct mark, and then areas that might not be as natural to the actual candidate or that can inhibit their potential is then marked with a cross or an X to show them that this might be an area where you're going to struggle a bit more and that we need to look at. I then want to talk a bit about briefly the South African research. And we have published a research supplement containing all of the information if you do require more information that will be made available on JVR Online with the launch of the new South African norms. So it will be available for you for download from there so that you will be able to see what we've done and the findings in a bit more detail. But just looking at reliability, we found good reliabilities, acceptable reliabilities for most of the scales. You will see that there are some scales, particularly the ones with fewer items like excitement and security, where we had a bit of a lower reliability in the South African sample. But again, you're never going to use the assessment in isolation. You're never going to report on just one value or one scale. So still relatively good and acceptable for the purposes that the career value scale is being used. Just as a note, the sample did consist of 2,154 candidates. And we did also run internal consistencies across different age groups, genders, and ethnic groups to see if it functioned the same for all of the groups. And more detail about that is available in the supplement. In terms of the factor structure for our exploratory factor analysis, we did it by using item parceling rather than looking at the individual items. And we found that all of the item parcels loaded onto the expected factors where they were supposed to, so really clustering quite well into the expected factor structure. And for the confirmatory factor analysis, we used a weighted least square means estimator, and based on the statistical elements and indicators or fit indices that you see there, we found acceptable to good results in terms of the fit of our actual model for the factor structure. And overall, based on the EFA, but then also on the CFA's fit indices, overall good evidence of factor structure that is in line with the theory and what is intended, how it is intended to work. And like I said, that the items do effectively cluster and actually then measure what they were designed to measure. We also did Rasch analysis to see if any of the items might need to be revised or need to be adapted for South Africa. And there were a few items identified that were underfitting, which means that they might be tapping into more than just the scale that we are trying to measure. But upon further investigation and based on the reliabilities of the items and also based on the factor structure, no items were then identified for exclusion or revision. We also did differential item functioning across both, well, not both, but across age groups, gender, and ethnicity. And the items that were flagged for potential diff or differential item functioning were investigated further to see if they might potentially cause bias in any of these biographical factors. But we argued that those items that did show diff was rather due to real group differences and not an element of test bias. So really looking into them with more detail and through an analytical lens and based on all of the other analyses that were done to really be able to see that in terms of the scales, no one scale was consistently promoting a specific group like younger participants to score higher than older participants, for instance. So really paying attention to that. And you can read up a lot more about that in the manual or in the supplement as well. They also did at JVR a couple of years ago correlations between the career value scale and some of the other instruments. So I just want to report on some of that as well for your interest. And this is specifically correlations between the CVS and the basic trades inventory. And we see there that something like career development, influence, service orientation, and creativity, all correlated quite highly with conscientiousness. And then service orientation also correlating quite highly with agreeableness. So starting to also show us how we can link certain elements of personality and values in combinations to try to help or guide a person in making their career decisions as well. Then also correlations between the CVS and the locus of control inventory. And there we saw high correlations between all of the actual scales and internal locus of control. But interestingly, something like financial rewards and independence, also prestige and security, correlated highly significantly with an external locus of control. So just thinking back about how people can be motivated by finances or by prestige or security or having that high management role rather than an internal type of motivation. And then also career development, creativity and excitement, influence, prestige and security that correlated quite significantly with autonomy. So some really interesting findings and also available in a technical supplement that you can request if you're interested in this. So to conclude, told you a lot about the actual tool, and I told you a lot about the sales potential report. But what I hope that I also managed to highlight, also managed to instill is the importance of values within the organizational context, within companies, and how it can really help a person to align themselves with jobs where they can fit or where they will be satisfied, but also the value that it could potentially have for organizations in terms of person-organization fit as well. Just important to remember, the CVS is not designed to be used for selection purposes, but can be used in career development, career guidance, or career choice. Then I want to end off with a quote, not by an academic, not by a researcher, by Elvis Presley, but something that I think is really quite amazing. So he said values are like fingerprints. Nobody's are the same, but you leave them all over everything you do. And I think that is so true and so accurate about values. It's not something that we can ever disconnect from the individual. So in each of their settings, and based on what we heard about values earlier from all of the research and all of the writings about it, it is guides of behavior. It is expressions of needs, and it is something that will influence how a person react, but also interact. And I just think it's a beautiful summary of the importance of values. There's a reference list for you. The sources or articles that I used, and there are plenty more resources available, but yeah, just a few for you for some extra reading, and they are also in the slides that you will receive. So I want to thank you for tuning in. I do hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you found it valuable, and if you require more information about the product itself, feel free to email info@jvrafrica.co.za. If you would like to get in touch with me personally to talk a bit about the South African research, I was the main researcher on that project. So feel free to also drop me an email at kobe@jvrafrica.co.za. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a lovely day. Goodbye.